A warm welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking your time to tune into our first webinar on promoting our virtual team improvement workshop, certification workshop. What we want to do here is introduce you to the integrated team approach. That's purpose is to drive team effectiveness. We want to show you how to develop teams. This is important now more than ever. We hope by the end of this webinar, you will register to get certified in the Rocket Model and Team Assessment Survey. I'll be your main contact at 3 Minute Mile to help you out with further knowledge about the integrated team solution. As we've come to realize, virtual working has become the new norm. TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, has recently announced a plan to be 75% remote by 2025. They have over 417,000 employees. Another example is a media company of 60 staff decided to sell their office spaces and move completely virtually. The message is clear. Organizations across the globe will have many virtual teams and be working from different geographical locations. A little bit of housekeeping. The session will be recorded. We will be sending you all the recording of the webinar after. The chat function at the bottom of your screen will be your chance to engage with us throughout the webinar. Please ask as many questions as possible. We will answer any immediate questions. And if any questions are left unanswered, we will follow up with you after. So please let me introduce our esteemed guest speakers. Firstly, we have Jeremy Sutton, our founder and managing director. Secondly, we have Gordon, or Gordy Curphy. He likes to be called Gordy, author of Ignition and the creator of the Rocket Model and Team Assessment Survey. Thirdly, we're happy to have Gabrielle Galassi, or Gab Galassi, our associate at 3 Minute Mile. So let me talk a little bit about the agenda for a few seconds, if we can get the next slide, please. So this will be our agenda, take some time to digest. And without further ado, let me pass on to Jeremy to talk about the survey results we got from our participants today who joined the webinar. Jeremy.
Thanks very much, Joseph. And thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to join us for this, our first webinar introducing the Rocket Model and its integrated approach to team effectiveness. You were really kind enough to respond to the survey that we sent out in advance of today's webinar. And what we wanted to do was just do a quick pulse check and find out which areas of team performance or team effectiveness would be of most interest for us to cover during this webinar. The results were fascinating. You know, we saw that 37% of our results were about teams that are really groups working with teams. Part of me wants to say, is that somehow related to what came in as a tie for second place, virtual teams? And, you know, Joseph talked a little bit about the impact of COVID and the pandemic and how it has had, the impact it has had on the way that teams work together. So I'm wondering if maybe some teams that previously were co-located and now forced to work in remote settings are now feeling more like groups, in fact, than teams. Tied for second place was helping teams get from good to great. And also there was an element of fixing broken teams. And again, you know, we might say that this could be a result of impact of the pandemic. These results were so interesting to me because Dr. Gordon Curphy, who's joining us today, did some research at the end of 2019 where we surveyed over 600 internal and external global consultants. And we asked them about the reasons that they were called in by organizations to work with their teams. We gave them the same list that we provided to you. And it turned out that virtual teams were at the absolute dead bottom of this list. Gordon Curphy has done a lot of research on teams over the years. You'll be introduced to lots of that research and its implication in our virtual team improvement workshop, should you choose to join us to become accredited in the Rocket Model and its approach to team effectiveness. But one of the things that Dr. Curphy's research tells us is that organizations simply do not have a common or a standardized approach to building and maintaining high performing teams. This gets in the way of teams basically being able to deliver organizational results in a consistent way. I think as executive educators, we do a very good job of teaching leaders how to have one-to-one interactions with their team members. And this often results in what we could call a hub and spoke model, where everything is coming back to the leader and involved in these one-to-one interactions. Leader as coach, delivering performance related feedback, having difficult conversations. What we don't do is give leaders and teams the tools and the resources that they need to work together on building and maintaining a high performing team that delivers exceptional results for their organizations. So if there was ever a time for organizations to kind of shift gear, change direction, and start to invest in this type of scalable and standardized approach to building and maintaining high performing teams, I think it's now. I think the changes in the way of working brought on by COVID and the pandemic is going to necessitate that organizations take a closer look at this area and probably assign accountability, for team building and team working necessitated by COVID and the pandemic. So what we found in working with this solution with clients is not only does it help teams deliver the results that they need to for their organizations, it also increases feelings of inclusion and agency. So it gives team leaders a standardized approach to make sure that everybody's voice is heard and everybody feels related and still connected, even though they might be working remotely. So in some ways, we could say that this is not only a solution for building team effectiveness, but it's also a solution towards building social resilience within teams that could help us deal with the mental health effects, I think, of the COVID and the pandemic and the issues of working alone. If we can move to the next slide, Emily. The integrated approach that the Rocket model and Gordon Curphy brings is made up of three principal components. Okay, so in order to, let's say, focus on building and maintaining high performing teams, Gordon Curphy defines a concept called TQ. And so if we think of TQ as the ability to build and maintain a high performing team, it could be considered an attribute, much like IQ for intelligence or EQ for emotional intelligence. We can measure this attribute at the individual level, at the level of a team, or even at the level of an organization. Gordon Curphy has a saying, sometimes it's not the seed, it's the soil. And so in working with organizations to help them become better at nurturing high performing teams, this solution can give us a lot of insight on how to do that. But let's take a look at these three components. The first thing that we need to do is we need to give teams and their leaders a roadmap to team effectiveness. Gordon Curphy's research over the years has kind of identified 8 critical components to building and maintaining high performing teams. And he's going to tell us a little bit about them in a minute. The second is we need to give teams and their leaders feedback. Where is their team with respect to that roadmap? And we do this with the team assessment survey. And so this is a diagnostic report that benchmarks the team's performance in these 8 critical components and gives them normative feedback on where they stand in those 8 components versus a norm group of over 2,500 global leadership teams. Finally, we need to give teams and their leaders the tools that they need to get from where they are to where they want to be. And the tools are comprised of the book, Ignition, a guide to building high performing teams. You can get this in hard copy. You can, excuse me, download a Kindle version, and we'll send out the link for that. Within the book, there are over 40 carefully curated team improvement activities. And so the team assessment survey or the feedback is not only diagnostic, but it's prescriptive. So when you see the results for a given team, you can see how that team is performing to other teams in any one of these 8 different components. And then the book Ignition and the team improvement activities will guide you towards specific experiences that the team can integrate into its daily work to help them improve in that specific area. And so now what I'd like to do is turn it over to Gordy Curphy, and he'll tell you a little bit more about the rocket model.
Well, thank you, Joseph and Jeremy. Here's the reason we got started with the rocket model was, if you ask 20 leaders how to build high-performing teams, chances are you're going to get 20 different answers. There is no one consistent model for building high-performing teams that's well known across different industries or organizations. What we do know is that research tells us that only 1 in 5 teams are high performing. So whatever models team leaders are using, it's not working particularly well. The other thing I will say is the 1 in 5 teams being high performing with 80% needing help, that was pre-COVID. I think since the advent of COVID, the percentage of high performing teams has only gone down. Now, we've been doing research on teams for about 20 years and very much take what I call a science practitioner approach. I'm a PhD industrial organizational psychologist, so I like research. I'm a bit of a nerd. On the other hand, research doesn't do a whole lot of good unless we can package it up in such a way that makes practical sense to people who actually have to use it. So we've very much taken what I call the science practitioner approach, looking at what the research tells us about a particular topic, in this case, how to build high-performing teams, and then how do you package it up in such a way that makes sense to people who actually lead teams. And we've created a model that works equally well with launching brand new teams, combining teams, virtual teams, matrix teams, getting teams from good to great, working with C-suite teams. The model works. And the model probably answers 99% of the issues that crop up on teams. Now, I want you to think about a team that you either work on currently or one that you have been consulting with or very familiar with, because we're going to use that team to kind of rate these different components of the model. And we want to think about, okay, how has COVID perhaps affected these different components? Because we'll be doing a poll afterwards to get your feedback about which components are most affected. So let me walk you through the rocket model. And if I'm going to build a high-performing team, we're going to start at the bottom of the model and work our way up. So I'll quickly go through these components, but think about the team that you're on or what you work with and how COVID has affected these different components. First component is called context, and that's really the situation surrounding the team. Who are the team's customers, competitors, regulators? What are the market conditions going on? What are the geopolitical factors affecting the team? So you have to build a high-performing team. You have to make sure everybody's on the same page with respect to the situation. Everybody's thinking about customers the same way. Everybody's thinking about competitors the same way, market conditions, the impact of COVID. And everybody also agrees on the challenges facing the team. That's what context is all about. Then we move up to mission and talent. Mission is all about the team's purpose. Why does the team exist? What are its goals? In other words, how does the team measure success? And what are the processes and plans it puts in place to accomplish those goals? You got to have all three of those in place for a team to be high performing. Clear purpose, clear set of goals, good plans to drive that. Then we look at talent. Talent has to do with who's on the team. Do we have the right number of people on the team? Many teams are too big to be effective. Do we have the right number of people on the team? Are they structured properly? Do people have clear roles and responsibilities? Do we have the right set of skills on the team? Is everybody in the team a good team player? With some teams, we find that people have clear roles, clear responsibilities, good skills, but they don't play nice with other people. In many cases, this gets exacerbated with COVID. Then we look at norms and buy-in. Norms are the unwritten rules in which teams get things done. It has to do with how do teams run meetings? How do they make decisions? How do they communicate with each other? What's the rules around accountability? So how have team meetings and communication, decision making been impacted by COVID? Then we look at buy-in. Buy-in is the motivational factor in the rocket model. It says, how much motivation, how much energy, effort, and are people willing to put forward to help the team succeed? Are people doing the tasks that have been assigned to them? Are they fully engaged with the team? Are they helping the team succeed? That's what buy-in's all about. Resources and courage. Resources are the budget available to the team, the hardware and software available to the team, the authority that the team can leverage to get things done. Many teams have enough resources to be successful, but the resource needs have changed with COVID. When people were co-located, they had certain needs in terms of office space, cubicles, desks, offices. But now that we've gone remote, the resource needs have changed. Courage. Courage is the trust and psychological safety factor in the rocket model. So high-performing teams have a high level of courage. That means people trust each other and that people can speak truth to power. They can raise difficult issues and the team works through conflict. My line is polite teams get polite results. So high-performing teams do have quite a bit of conflict, but the conflict is about the issues, not about the people on the team. And the last factor is results. Is the team actually moving the needle? Given its purpose, given its goals for mission, is the team being successful? Is it getting better over time? Is it learning from its successes and failures? Has the team learned how to win? Those are the 8 components. Give those some thought and think about which one of these components has been most affected by COVID. Jeremy, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Gordy. So you'll all have a poll that will appear on your screen in a second. And if you can just quickly, kind of instinctively think about those 8 different components and select the one which you believe has been most impacted by the change in working brought on as a result of the pandemic. So we'll have about 15 seconds. I don't think we need more than this. Just go with your gut instinct. Select the component that you think has been most impacted by the pandemic. Okay, and we'll close this survey now and maybe take a look at the results. There we go. All right, interesting. Okay, so we almost had an internal bet on this, and I was thinking context and mission, and Gordy said norms, and Gordy, bingo. Yes, so okay, we talked about how basically the team assessment survey was both diagnostic and prescriptive. So, first of all, fantastic. This is interesting feedback from our audience, thinking that norms are indeed, going to be some of the things most impacted by COVID. Also, kind of some surprises for me in terms of courage, thinking about resources and buy-in, yep, and certainly context. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just show you how we can draw the link between these different components of the rocket model through to the team improvement activities that you would then use to design a team intervention. Okay, and so if we can just move to the next slide, some of the tools that we have in our kit, you'll remember I mentioned the book Ignition, and this is not a book that's intended to be read cover to cover. This is not just a treatise on teamwork, but you're meant to read the first 2 chapters, and then within the book, each chapter addresses one of, I think it's 9 or 11 common scenarios that you might face or that might be facing the team that you're working with right now. So those scenarios would include the formation of a new team, the introduction of a new team leader, the merger of 2 teams, virtual teamwork, etc. So you basically go to that chapter, and what Gordy does is he gives us a case study to illustrate in a really high level of detail, like a step-by-step guide to designing and delivering an intervention for that. And there's also some practices about building the rocket model into programs of leadership assessment, programs of leadership development to make the solution scalable, all covered within this book. The other tool that we have is the team assessment survey. And so I mentioned diagnostic and prescriptive. So if we move to the back of that report, and Emily, if you can take us to the next slide, what we'll see is at the back of the report in the team assessment survey, each of the components of the rocket model is related to specific team improvement activities. So you can see, for instance, if norms are the issue and we're interested in exploring how norms are affecting our performance as a team, then what we can do is we can look at these exercises around team norms, operating rhythm, operating level, decision making, communication, accountability, and self adjustment. Then basically, if we can move to the next slide, you'll see that you can log on to the Rocket Model website. And not only are these team improvement activities described in the Rocket Model, but if you register on the site, you can download all of the supporting materials. So these will include slide decks, they will include handouts, note pages, samples of what the exercise looks like. And really, I mean, as team facilitation practitioners, consultants, executive educators, a lot of these exercises might be in our toolkit already, or we might have different ones. But the idea here is basically to transfer ownership. The principle is not about consultants coming in to fix teams. It's about equipping teams and their leaders with the knowledge and the resources that they need to fix themselves and to continually improve, adjust, and adapt and be agile in the face of emergent challenges. And so I think that's really the value of this solution for our clients and the organizations that we work with. It's scalability. So you're not paying a high price consultant to come in and fix the team, but rather the consultant is helping the organization leverage these resources, embed them into their talent management systems, their leadership development, their leadership assessment programs, to help the organization as a whole with a standardized approach and system to build and maintain high performing teams that deliver exceptional results. And so now what I'd like to do is just kind of turn this over to one of our associates, Gab Galassi. And so Gab has, recently worked with the Rocket Model, the team assessment survey, for one of his clients, and he's going to take us through a quick case study. So over to you, Gab.
Thank you. Thank you. And hello, everyone. Yeah, so very briefly, I just wanted to talk about my experience using the tool. And what I've been doing is I've been working with a team, PR and comms team, in a big IT software company. Um, the reason why I decided to use the Rocket model was that I was talking to the team leader about their current situation, and just to summarize a very high level what their challenge was, um, a um, a lack of support, or a perceived lack of support from the organization, like a perceived sense within the team that everybody was really overstretched and overworked, and obviously all the complications of COVID. So the remote work and the feeling of distance within the team. I think for me, the thing that attracted me to using the tool in the first place was that everybody can pitch in. As a consultant, as consultants, we're often called in, and if we don't insist, we don't necessarily get access to all the people that we would like to talk to. We talk to the team leaders, we talk to HR professionals. However, I always remember one of my lecturers at uni used to tell us, when you get called in to work in an organization, just make sure you get there a few minutes before the scheduled time of your appointment. Just sit at reception and just observe. Just look at how people walk around the office. Look at what happens when people welcome you, and you're going to get a lot of insights into the culture of the organization in a very indirect way. We've lost all of that now, but even more so, when I work with a team, I want to have a tool that allows me to virtually talk to everyone, every single person, and that's exactly what the Rocket model was capable of offering me. The insights that we got out of the survey were amazing. one of the most important or meaningful things that I was able to do with the tool was to talk to the team leader about the results. The survey has a way of presenting the difference between the team leader assessment of the team against all the different dimensions and the way that the team on average responded to it, or to the different dimensions. And so you can see if there's any discrepancy between what the leader thinks and what the team thinks. And you can see where those discrepancies are. And you can also see how worried you should be about those discrepancies and how you can use those insights even before you start working with a team to really align your work with the expectations of the team leader, who ultimately is one of the key decision makers and enforcers of the change that you want to create, and the support that you want to offer to the team. Um, so for me, the coaching conversations with a team leader on the basis of the results of the survey were one of the highlights of the experience for sure. I have to say that the workshop was also, actually, we ended up doing two workshops because one workshop wasn't enough to cover all of the work that we wanted to do. In this particular case, I think the team quotient of the team was pretty high, except for a very sore area, which was resources. And so we basically designed the workshop with the rest of the team on the basis of the survey, on the basis of the conversations, the coaching conversations I had with the team leader after the survey, and we basically spent both workshops creating resources for the team on the basis of the fact that we were not going to have more budget from the organization, and that some of the things that the team were expecting were not going to come. So we could work very honestly, very transparently on the idea that yes, it would have been desirable to have this or that resource, but the organization was not in a position to offer it. So the workshops became opportunities for us to create additional resources that the team didn't necessarily know they could create or generate for themselves. And again, I guess the second highlight of the work done with the rocket model for me was, apart from the very, very meaningful and insightful conversations with the team leader, was also the extreme sense of accountability, the inclusion, the sense of inclusion and the sense of agency that the entire project instilled in each team member. You have to consider that basically the moment you offer the survey results, you are effectively empowering each single individual in the team to have their voice heard. And so the quality of the work that you do with people after that is done is immensely superior to anything else that you can do by just showing up and trying your best to support a team on the basis of maybe just a couple of conversations that you've had in your training needs analysis with a couple of key stakeholders. You've listened to everyone, and so your intervention is a lot more effective.
That's great. Thank you, Gab. Thank you very much. Okay, and so thank you all for listening, and thanks for your participation. We now have some time scheduled for some Q&A, and so hopefully some of the topics have raised some ideas, some thoughts, kind of, and we hope that today you will have taken away, this introduction to this integrated approach to teamwork and understanding of why more than ever it's probably important for organizations to invest some of their time and their energy on helping to build leaders to build and maintain high performing teams. And of course, we wanted to extend a warm invitation for you all to register for our upcoming virtual team improvement workshop, where you will become accredited to use these tools. So kind of after you've heard everything that we've talked about today, are there any immediate questions which come to mind? I know that we've had a channel kind of going on through the webinar, and Joseph's been monitoring that for us. Joseph, what sort of questions have come from the audience in terms of what they've heard so far?
Right. Thank you very much, Jeremy. So I've got one question. Can you give us an example of how the rocket model framework is scalable in a large organization? That can be scalable.
So yes, I think it's probably best for you to sort of take this, Gordy. We have examples of basically where the model has been embedded into an organization's leadership development programs, and kind of embedded into their critical competencies for leaders. And Gordy, you've got a good case study. I think you can run us through, if I can hand it over to you.
Yeah. So we worked with a very large beverage company, global beverage company, and the CEO said the organization was operating far too much in silos. They weren't working as teams. He saw teams as being a critical to the organization's success, and he says he had maintained that people weren't working as teams. And he charged the CHRO to come up with a program to make teamwork scalable across the entire organization. So we work closely with the CHRO and the chief learning officer and the folks in leadership development to create a building high performing teams leadership development program. It's a 2-day program. People got, and it was targeted at all the people leaders in the company. So we had 1,000 people leaders go through this program. And people going through the program basically got some personality feedback to find out who they were, some of the self-insight, self-awareness pieces we often see in leadership development companies. So here's how you're hardwired as a leader. In this case, we use the Hogan Personality Inventory and the Hogan Development Survey to talk about the bright side and dark side of leadership. We also talked about some of the experiences they had as a leader and how that shaped who they are as a leader. And then we had everybody going through the program do a team assessment survey with their teams back home. So as we transition from how you're hardwired or how your experiences shape who you are as a leader, we start talking about, okay, so what impact is that having on your team? So all the participants learned about the rocket model, learned about the 8 components. Then they got feedback on the team assessment survey to find out, okay, to what extent are the teams that I lead operating as a high performing team? What's my team doing well? What's my team not doing so well? And then we taught them a number of team improvement activities that they could use with their teams back home. How do we help them run a team feedback session? So how do they share the team assessment survey results with the rest of the team? How do they run a context assessment exercise to get everybody on the same page about context? How do we run a roles and responsibilities matrix? How do we improve how meetings are run with the team? So leaders got taught 6 or 7 different team improvement activities from Ignition that they could take back home and use. And what the program did was sort of break the set that Jeremy talked about earlier. It got away from dealing with people using a hub and spoke model in terms of coaching individuals, communicating with individuals, providing feedback to individuals, to working with the collective team as a whole. And like Gab said, this really empowers the team. So when the whole team gets to see the data, the whole team gets to work on the kind of activities that they are doing to help the team improve, teamwork goes way up. And what was very interesting about this client is that they had been growing at about 5% a year in terms of their revenues and the number of they call it cans, the number of cans sold. In the years in which the rocket model was introduced, sales went up to 9%, from 5 to 9%. There were no new products introduced then. There were no competitors that collapsed then. The market conditions had been fairly stable. And the CEO and the CHRO attributed all to getting leaders to better understand and get their teams to operate as high performing teams. So You go to the company now and you ask about how to build high performing teams. I asked that original question about, if I asked 20 leaders how to build high performing teams, if I asked 20 leaders in that company, they would all say the rocket model. They know exactly how to build teams.
That's great. Thank you, Gordy. We had some other questions come up on the chat, so if I can just pose these to you, I think that we can maybe get through these. If I already use other team assessments, why should I use the rocket model? How would you say that the rocket model differentiates itself from other team assessment tools?
You want me to answer this? I'm not sure if it was for me or anybody. Well, so let me tell you. So generally speaking, team improvement tools, team assessments kind of fall into two camps. One is what I call the individual differences camp. This is where we have personality, work values, social styles, 360s, some sort of instrument that was designed to measure an individual, right? And we have everybody on the team take those individual level assessments, and then we aggregate the results and use those aggregated results to make some inferences about the team. That's what I call the individual differences approach. That approach describes about 10% of what's going on with the team. It is very limited about what is going on with the team. You cannot tell from personality inventories to what extent everybody on the team is on the same page about customers, about clients, whether the team has a common purpose, whether the team runs effective meetings, whether it has enough resources, whether people can speak truth to power in terms of courage. So the second way we assess teams is using what I call more a processes and practices approach. How does the team actually get work done? And in many situations, we actually use a combination of the two. It's good to look at aggregated individual differences measures because that may tell us why a team may be acting a certain way. That may be providing some of the underlying reasons why a team might be acting a certain way. But we need to have a team level assessment to tell us what a team is actually doing and how is it getting work done. I use the same analogy. I do tons and tons of leadership assessments like I know many of you do. And I use the same analogy with using personality inventories and business simulations and mental ability tests with 360s. It's the same thing. The former kind of tell us how a person's hardwired, what their tendencies, what their trends are. The second says, okay, what impact, how are other people seeing this stuff? And what the team assessment survey does says, here's how people are hardwired. Here's how they show up to other people. This is the impact it's having on teams. So same thing with aggregated individual difference results and the team assessment survey. One can tell us underlying trends, reasons, root causes. The second one tells us what's actually going on.
I think that's really helpful, Gordy. Thank you. And my experience and my practice of working with teams, has kind of changed in this past year. I was introduced to Gordy about a year ago, almost to the date. Before that, if somebody had asked me to come in and work with a leadership team, my go-to would have been Hogan Assessment Systems, and I would have done this kind of individual differences approach that you described, Gordy. And anecdotally, I would say that typically 30% of the team would be highly engaged and interested, curious, want to learn. 30% would be sort of interested, but maybe a bit superficial, and 30% might be actively disengaged. I would have to work as a facilitator to bring them into the conversation and help them understand why it was relevant to them. It was a bit of a blinding flash of the obvious. We sometimes say when I met Gordy, and a bit of an aha moment. For me, I think working with teams on this individual differences level, and the idea of helping the team build vulnerability based trust, which is a very kind of high level of relational trust. If I share what my personal foibles might be with you, and I say it's okay for you to share that with me, and therefore we will work better together. I think that's really valid, and it's important, for leaders to kind of create this environment with their teams and to have the humility that it takes to go on such a journey. But I think there is something earlier than that that's more proximal, more fundamental, and Gordy would describe that in like more transactional trust. His rocket model and the team assessment survey talk about a trust trifecta, based on, first of all, competence. Do you have the capabilities to deliver your job, that what you're meant to do for this team? Secondly, do you treat the team with benevolence? Gordy said, do you play well with other people? Are you a benevolent influence on the team? And then third, do you have integrity? Do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you show up? And I think that this sort of transactional trust happens before you get to the level of relational trust. And if you haven't established those fundamentals, if I'm not sure what role I'm playing on the team and what I'm supposed to deliver, and there's some confusion there, engaging at the level of relational or vulnerability-based trust might seem a bit superficial and run the risk of creating an artificial dialogue. Gordy, we had another question just about, are the results in the team assessment survey anonymous? Is there a potential for a team leader's weaknesses to be exposed in ways which would make them feel vulnerable?
Great question. Yes. So typically when we do a team feedback session like Gab did, what we end up doing is we recode the team leader as a team member. So the only results that get shared with the team are anonymous aggregated results. So you can't tell who did what, who rated what. We also run a second report, as Gab talked about, and the second report really looks at what are the team leaders' perceptions of the team on the 8 rocket model components versus how does the rest of the team think it's doing. That second report is usually for team leaders only. It's their way of aligning how they're viewing the team versus how do the rest of the team think it's functioning and performing. We typically don't use that report in team feedback sessions where we share the results with the team, because teams end up focusing all their time on gaps between the leader's perceptions and the rest of the team's perceptions, then looking at how the team overall is functioning. Good for the team to know, good for the team leader to know in terms of how he or she's perceptions line up with the rest of the team. They need to know that. Not necessarily important for the team to see that. Gab, I don't know, would you add anything to that? Because you had both reports. I was just curious how that played out in your scenario.
I would also add that so for sure, I did not use the one that had the 2 different answers with the team. I fully agree with you on how that would go down, but definitely used it in coaching with a team leader, and it was very insightful. I also would add that I received an additional report where I could see that one person that was actually outside of the team, but that was looped in to comment on the team, was incredibly their answers were incredibly different from the team assessment and the leader assessment, and I decided to have a separate conversation with that individual, ask them if it was okay not to consider their answers, because at the end of the day it wasn't necessarily productive or helpful in that sense. And so I felt personally like I had full control of any possible vulnerability or danger, like attached to the survey results, fully, really.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say about that is our research shows that team leaders overestimate team performance by about a point to a 1.5 on a 5-point scale. Every team leader thinks they're a leadership legend. The rest of the team thinks they may be charismatically challenged. All right. So that's one of the biggest barriers we have to overcome in terms of trying to scale teamwork is if team leaders already think they're good at it, then there's no reason to get feedback or get trained. So our research pretty clear here that leaders grossly overestimate the extent to which their teams are operating as high performing teams.
Thank you, Gordy. Sorry, I'm responding to questions on the channel too. So we had another question.
think it was about other models. So it was linked to the first question.
Yeah.
And, you know,
And Victoria has asked, have you found any specific needs to address in companies regarding a virtual working environment? So I guess, you know, has there been any explicit kind of queries about this? And I can answer from our side. I know that one of the clients that we work with is a UN agency, and part of their work involves forming teams very quickly in response to crisis situations. And we found that they have you know, adopted the use of the rocket model and the team assessment survey and the team improvement activities to help a team sort of get through the whole forming, storming, norming, performing. So, you know, the idea of moving through these phases of team formation and development as quickly as possible by using the hierarchical nature of the rocket model. So running some team improvement activities to understand the context, define the mission, and scope out each of the different components. I don't know if that answers the question about specifically working in virtual environments, but they use it to help form teams that have been virtual and could continue to operate that way. But Gordy, maybe you have some other examples.
No, I think that's a great one, Jeremy. As I said earlier, you know, if team leaders and organizations didn't have a well understood model for building high performing teams, believe me, the rocket model, the team assessment survey, and these team improvement tools are great methodology to just create a common language. This is what we mean by high performing teams. These are the sort of components you need to pay attention to. And using the team assessment survey then to figure out, okay, so what are we doing well and not so well? Actually using data then to make a decision about, okay, here are the activities we need to do then to help this team get from good to great, to get it properly launched, to turn a bad, underperforming team around. That's the methodology we want to use. And it doesn't matter if these folks are virtual or they're co-located.
That's great. Thank you, Gordy. Okay, and so we've run out of time today. So I want to thank you all for your participation and thank you for your engagement during the session. We will send out a link to the recording of the webinar so you can come and revisit. We will also send out a transcript of the Q&A. And so thanks again. Have a great day. And please register for our upcoming team improvement workshop. When you can hear more about the rocket model and its integrated approach to team effectiveness. Bye-bye.
thank
Thank
you,
you, Jeremy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.